Most companies think their sales success depends on recruiting more superstar performers. But today's guest hints that it's one of the most dangerous and costly mistakes a leader can make. John Golden is a globally recognized sales and marketing strategist and best-selling author of the books Winning the Battle for Sales and Social Upheaval. He is also the host of Sales Pop, a podcast ranked in the top 2% worldwide. He's the former CEO of two global consulting firms, and John has helped countless organizations move from chance-driven results to system-driven success. So today, he's here to share how leaders can build scalable sales systems, boost retention, and create alignment across sales and marketing that customers can actually feel. John, welcome to the show.
Yeah, listen, thanks a lot, Mason. Pleasure to be here.
Hey, you've said in the past that chasing star performers is one of the most dangerous traps for business leaders. Why is that such a costly strategy?
On a number of fronts, Mason, is number one is like these superstar performers. If you're a superstar performer, number one, you're probably not looking for a job. You've already got one. You're probably sitting like doing very nicely where you are. So number one, they're very, very hard to find and extremely hard to recruit. And the problem is with a lot of superstar performers is people fall into the trap of thinking, if Mason's a superstar performer, if I hire him, then all my other salespeople just need to copy what Mason does, and they'll all become superstar performers. So we'll get this knock-on effect. The problem is, 9 times out of 10, Mason doesn't even know what makes Mason a superstar performer. It's the unconsciously competent, yeah, or he does, but there's no way it's transferable, or he can't like codify it. He couldn't train somebody else to do what he does, right? So you fall into these traps. So what you end up doing, as you said, is if you can attract a superstar performer, you're paying a lot of money for one person who really is going to kind of operate on your own. It's not going to have the impact on the other people that you think it's going to have. In fact, it's probably going to have the opposite impact, because guess what comes with if you have one of these top performers who's used to doing their own thing. Well, they tend to be a little bit, shall we say, they tend to operate a little bit outside the lines. So now what do you have? Does everybody else get the chance to operate outside the lines? You probably not, because you keep them inside the lines. So now they see, well, hang on a second, this guy is allowed to operate outside the lines just because he's Mr. Superstar, whereas I have to. So it has these knock-on effects of it can actually create internal tensions as well.
It's, what do they call it? Top salesman's disease?
Yeah. And like I said, Mason, it's everybody. It seems logical and intuitive when people go like, just go out and find the best salesperson you can get for this industry, and we bring them in, and then they'll be able to go out and they'll have a book of business and they'll bring their clients over and life will be wonderful. And like I said, number one is, if they're doing really well, they're probably not going to leave where they are. And if you would throw money at them, maybe. But the other thing too is it's not a guarantee either, because you could have this fantastic book of business. It doesn't mean that the clients that they used to have are going to come over to your product. It doesn't mean that the timing is right. There's so many factors. So people often fall into that fallacy as well of thinking, well, if I get Mason, within a few months, he's going to bring all these customers with him. You may have phenomenal relationships with those customers, but they don't want to, they don't need to, it's not the right time, and so they're not going to move.
Right. So can you share a story of a company that leaned too heavily on a few stars and what happened when they shifted to a system-driven model?
No, absolutely. And in personal experience, like we did have at times in some of the consulting companies I ran, I inherited a couple of star performers and and a couple in particular who basically fit that whole mold of they were star performers. They brought in a lot of revenue, loved by their customers. So you would say, well, what's wrong with that? Isn't that great? And you go, yes, it is great until you start to measure the impact that they have internally and the chaos that they sow internally, because it turns out being loved by the customer was basically saying yes to everything the customer asked for. The company, if it did, blaming the company if it didn't step up to support this particular customer, but also giving them stuff and promising things that we weren't able to fulfill, or that was eating away at the margin of the business, because that's another consideration. And so again, you have this situation where you have somebody who is ostensibly bringing in the most revenue, But at the same time, when you start to look at the knock on, you realize the margins of that revenue are not great because they keep giving away stuff for free overnight. You're reacting to every customer demand, so eroding the value of it. Not communicating properly with the implementation team, and again, you're now not able to deliver things in a systematic fashion because you don't know what they've promised, and they've promised out again. They're operating outside the lines. So it did come to a situation where the choice came down to, do you operationalize and systematize the sales organization and the sales team to operate in a consistent manner efficiently? Or do you say, I'm going to try and do that, but I'm going to carve out these couple of people just because of the revenue? And you can't do that. You can't be, it's like being half pregnant, right? I mean, you either are or you aren't. You can't do this. So eventually you have to make that decision to say, okay, your top performer has to start to learn how to operate within the system. And if they can't, then you have to face that unfortunate choice of perhaps this is no longer a fit. And yes, we all report to people, whether it's a board of directors or whatever. You need to be able to explain why it's okay to have your top performer, or ostensibly your top performer, walk away from the business.
So, what early warning signs should a CEO or executive look for that signal that their sales process isn't scalable or is putting the company at risk?
Well, I think the first and foremost, it's very simple. I would just ask, how accurate is your forecasting? And say, if you have if your forecasts are accurate, and you can take them to the bank, and it's only a couple of percentage points swing either way on a monthly or quarterly basis, then everything seems like it's working pretty well. Now, I don't know about you, but I have come across very few people who've ever told me that their forecasting is that accurate. And it's the number one complaint is from sales leaders and stuff, is that they can't trust the data, they can't forecast. And this is the knock-on effect of not having a well-defined sales process and a consistent execution. And I'll just give you a simple example, Mason, right? If we have say we have a 6-stage sales process, I know it's nicely defined what the different stages are and all of that, but it's not rigorously enforced, right? And it doesn't have rigor within each of the stages. Now, I put my opportunity in stage 2. You have an opportunity, identical characteristics, but you're a little more optimistic than I am. So you put it in stage 3, right? Immediately we have a problem. We have 2 identical opportunities. We're probably a very close in what's going to be their sales process or whatever, but they're in different stages now. So immediately your forecast is off because one of us is right and one of us is wrong. One of us, or maybe we're both wrong and we both have it in the wrong stage completely. But that's a key early indicator, is that if you don't have consistency, you can't have forecast accuracy. Because if I run the numbers now, your opportunity is probably showing up as a 75% close. Mine's showing up as a 50% close, but maybe they're both 50% or they're both 75%. So as you can see, the forecast is off. So that's one of the key ways of sanity checking yourself. If you think everything is running swimmingly, I would just say, look at your forecasting. How accurate is it? And then once you see, okay, our forecast is not that accurate and we're missing things, the next thing to do is to go and look at your sales process and say, okay, let's look at things on a macro level for a start. Let's just look at the process itself. Does it appear that we're having the issues, right? So maybe you say, okay, at stage 3, which is maybe that's the proposal stage or something. Hang on, that's where the biggest drop off is. That's where opportunities get stalled the most. So now that's a fantastic bit of information, because now you know there's something going on in your proposal stage that needs addressing. So even at a macro level, you can immediately go, okay, what's going on here? Let's investigate this. Are we doing this right? Do we have the right materials? Do we need to train people better during this process? Do we even need to redo the process, the proposal stage? Maybe it's not working properly. So that's another one, is looking at a macro level
Cool.
on what's happening in the different stages and adjusting your sales process appropriately. Then after that, you drop down into teams and individuals and start looking at them in the same way. Because here's another trap, I think, Mason, that we fall into as humans, and it often happens in sales. There is a bit of a resistance to the concept of either teaming or putting people where they're best suited, right? So what I mean by that is Mason's phenomenal at opening doors and getting appointments and starting a relationship. Phenomenal at that. Loves that. Great at that. Now, as he goes through the process, he's not so great at pushing the sale forward and closing the deal, right? Whereas John over here hates all that, like doesn't like that stuff of like prospect. He doesn't like opening doors, doesn't like doing that. But you give him an opportunity, a door that's opened, he'll run through it and he'll take it all the way to the line in no time. So what is the sensible thing to do there? Is it to take both of us and try to train us to be able to be good at the other parts that we're not good at? That's one option. But let's face it, traditionally we are never good at things we're not good at or we don't like doing. It's very difficult for us to become good at things that we just flat out don't like doing or we're not particularly good at. So what's the other option? The other option is to say, let's make Mason the door opener and let's make John the closer and let them work together and let them knock the numbers out of the park and collaborate. And I think those are other things that you can look at and other ways that you can optimize your sales team.
It's funny you say that because I actually know of a company that had that exact dilemma. It was a printing company,
Mhm.
and their number one salesperson was far and away better than any 2 or 3 of the others combined, and it was a decent sized sales force, far superior as far as production numbers went. However, he was not detail oriented. There were things that fell through the cracks and things that got screwed up, and he left a wake of mess behind him.
Yep.
And the leadership was like, how do we get this guy to conform to our quality standards? And the reality of it was, it's not like they're going to fire him because the guy was generating more revenue than anyone else by a
Mhm.
lot. And their question was, well, what do we do? And what they decided to do was they hired him a shadow, literally
Uh,
an assistant who was everything that he wasn't, that was detail oriented, that was compliance oriented, that double and triple check to make sure that if they ordered black ink, it was black ink. If they ordered blue ink, it was blue ink, and it was correct. And next thing you know, problems went away, sales stayed high, job satisfaction, it worked for them. But they literally hired someone to be this number one guy's shadow, and it worked. But
yeah, yeah, no, and
there's
that's
no way they were going to force that square peg into a round hole as far as compliance. And it wasn't in his nature to slow down, and it just wasn't. And they acknowledged that and really made the best of a difficult situation.
yeah, yeah, and that's a smart solution to the problem because, as you said, is you're never going to turn that you're never going to turn the top rep into something that he's not, that he's never been, that he never wanted to be. Right? You're just not going to do that. And you have your option: either you force compliance, and if they don't comply, then you let them go, or you do the other, where you say, okay, let's augment rather than me focusing on all the weaknesses this person has. Let me augment this with somebody who has the strengths, so we don't just get one on one making two, we get one on one making three.
So, beyond revenue, how do strong sales systems, in your opinion, improve employee engagement, morale, and retention?
Well, I think it's like anything else, Mason. I think when you give people a proven track to run on, they're normally quite receptive to that. And that I think has been the problem in sales because I think sales, a lot of the time, sales process and stuff has been something that's like they either bring in a consultant to do it, like, oh, let's bring in a consultant to find our sales process, or Mason, you like this type of thing. Why don't you go away and design our sales process and come back and then you come back and they go, yeah, that looks great. Throw it in the CRM. That's our sales process from now on. Send out a document, and we're good. We're now perfect. Everything is running smoothly, but it's not. Right. It's not, because at the end of the day, you haven't defined your sales process properly. You haven't involved enough stakeholders. You probably haven't gone into each stage and defined what are the things that need to happen in each stage in order to be able to progress it to the next stage. So you start to get that level of consistency. So the companies that do that really well, and this isn't just me talking, this is like ZS Associates and McKinsey have done research on this, that the top performing companies, sales organizations in the world, they have a defined sales process. So it's well defined. And within each stage of that sales process, all of the activities, etc., are very well defined. It is it is rigorously enforced. It's mandatory. There is no deviation on using this sales process, and it is constantly being looked at and refined because, as we know, buyer behavior is dynamic. So your sales process is going to have to be dynamic because your sales process should be mimicking buyer behavior. So I think that that really makes a massive difference to an organization when you have a very well defined sales process. You have all the stakeholders have signed off on it. The stages have activities and steps well defined in it. They have all the assets and materials you would need at that stage of the process. Everybody understands what each stage, what an opportunity in each stage looks like, what the characteristics are. So you have consistency. You're speaking the same language. Everybody understands. And then your sales leader, your sales manager is reviewing your book of business within your CRM, within the sales process. So you're also reinforcing, behaviors, etc. So those are the things that make a massive difference. And I think when done properly, even those salespeople or who still talk about sales being it's an art form. John, it's an art form. It's not science, it's an art form. You go, no, there are elements. Absolutely. We love the creative salespeople. We love that element, that can maybe that artistic element, but that comes on top. At the bottom, it has to be a repeatable process, and a very well defined and repeatable process. And you will find that the majority of salespeople, when they have a sales process that's well defined, that's really understandable, that works for them, they find that's a help and not a hindrance.
I could totally see that because from a sales leadership perspective, what's that old saying? If you don't have a standard, it's impossible to measure deviation.
Yep, absolutely.
So
Yeah.
if you were sitting across the desk from a CEO who wanted a quick win, something that they could implement Monday morning to immediately strengthen their sales systems, what would you tell them to do first?
Well, so there's a couple of things. Number one, I would say make sure your sales leaders are doing any of their meetings or reviews with their teams or their salespeople. They're doing it within the CRM, and they're doing it using live data. Because if you don't do that, you will never get you will always struggle with that issue, because people will be lazy, people will forget, people won't update things, they won't move things around. And if your sales leadership is not reinforcing that is non-negotiable, and that you're only going to deal with things that are in the system, then you'll cure that behavior. And I would just say that's a first one to go, because a lot of times the problems you have in a sales organization is they take their cues from their sales leaders. So if you never go into the CRM and do a review with me, with my live data, the message I'm getting is, doesn't really matter what I put in there, it's fine. So that's one that for me, that's one thing that's critical. The other thing I would say, and this is probably the biggest one, but it's very simple too. It's go and see your salespeople putting enough preparation time in before they have appointments. So are they ask a salesperson, say, bring up your calendar. I bet you have a load of appointments, and they'll say, yeah, I've got a meeting here, I got this meeting here, and you go, where's your prep time? Well, what do you mean? I say, when are you going to prep? You got this meeting at 3:00. When are you going to prep? Oh, I'll prep probably a few minutes beforehand. I'll do some research. Well, why isn't it on the calendar? Why isn't there half an hour blocked off for prep time? And that is over the years of some of the phenomenal salespeople I have seen, like people who are just fantastic, unbelievable people. Prep was non-negotiable. Non-negotiable. They would always prep. I would go for, I was actually, it was funny because I was telling my wife about this the other day, is when I was CEO, like at Huthwaite, and I would often go out on sales calls with maybe the VP of sales and the regional salesperson. And the night before any of those meetings, we would get together, and I wouldn't run this meeting. The salesperson would run the meeting between the three of us. So myself, the VP, and whatever. And the salesperson would go through, here's our strategy for tomorrow. Here's what's needed. Here's what you're going to do, VP. Here's what you're going to do, Mr. CEO. This is your role. And everything was planned out down to the thing. So when we got into the meeting, I knew exactly what I was there for. The VP knew exactly what they're for. And we knew how this was going to unfold. Prep time. I see this as not just a mistake that rookie salespeople make. Experienced salespeople make this as well, where prep is such a fundamental and kind of simple and seems like, intuitive. Everybody would do that. But the more experience you get, the more you start to take shortcuts, the more you start to go, just take a couple of minutes here. I've done this so many times. I don't really need to prep for this call. And then before you know it, you're not really prepping for calls anymore. You're winging things, and maybe sometimes that works, but it's going to catch you eventually. So I would say to the CEO, one thing is go back and go to your sales leadership, go to your sales team and say, I want to see blocked off prep time for every customer or prospect call you have, and I want you to go back and do preparation for the call as if it's your first time doing a sales call.
It's funny you say that because it's been a long time since I thought about this, but I wrote a book in 1999 called Sales Utopia: How to Get the Right People Doing the Right Things Enough Times, with a gentleman by the name of Alan Minster. And Alan used to talk about some of the things that we're talking about a lot, and I learned from him. He used to say that, to your comments about the sales process, he used to say that sales was a lot like manufacturing. You start with raw materials, you walk through specific steps in a specific order, and you come up with a finished product. Like, so if I make tables, I'm going to start with raw materials and I'm going to walk through specific steps in a specific order, and I'm going to come up with the ability to produce quality
Mhm.
tables consistently.
Yeah,
But if you rearrange or delete any steps in that process, you end up with a pile of junk. And
precisely.
and he was right then and he's still right. And when I hear you start talking about some of these things like pre-call planning, as far as I'm concerned, those are kind of the raw materials that go into the manufacturing process. If you don't have those raw materials, they don't go into that process, you're going to end up with junk.
Yeah, yeah.
So
How many
that
times how many times has that happened to you? You know, the way it's where you buy something at Home Depot and you bring it home and you start to put it together and you're looking at the instructions and you get a bit lazy and you're thinking, "No, I can figure this out." And
extra
then you
parts.
bit and then extra parts or there's a part or that doesn't look like the picture, and what you end up doing what do you end up doing? You end up deconstructing the whole thing and going back and following the instructions.
And afterwards, if you when you do it the second time, you do it right, you find out those weren't extra parts. You
Yeah,
didn't
there
do it
weren't
right.
extra parts, and it was actually quite straightforward. But that's the thing is, we just overestimate ourselves all the time. And then, like I said, sometimes when I mention this, people say, "Oh yeah, that's a rookie salesperson mistake," and I go, "It's not a rookie salesperson mistake. It's a mistake that a lot of us make as we get older and more experienced because we just think we don't need. We just yeah, we don't need to do those bits, and sometimes it's very humbling. And I always say this to people that if you're in a sales slump, first thing you should do is go back and look at when things were working for you and you were closing business, what were you doing? Because I will almost 100% guarantee you that you will discover that there was one or two things that you're not doing anymore that you used to do. You start doing them again, lo and behold, things start to pick up.
So, in your book, Winning the Battle for Sales, you draw lessons from military strategy.
Mhm.
What's one battlefield principle leaders can directly apply to building scalable sales systems today?
Oh yeah, there's a lot of them. I would say that one of the ones is I used it about CRM, to be honest. This is how I ended up with Pipeliner. The founder actually read this chapter in the book and contacted me. I used the David and Goliath analogy because I didn't really know the story that in depth. But anyway, it turns out that the story there was that the king offered David the latest, greatest armor and swords, everything. So the latest, greatest weaponry that you could possibly have. And, David tried it, was like, this is too heavy. I can't maneuver in this. This is go. So, and we know, cutting long story short, the old, Goliath came out and he just got the old slingshot and boom, the thing's down. And my point is that use the right tools for the right circumstances. Not about shiny new toys. It's not about jumping on the latest thing. It's about figuring out what really works for your circumstances. And I see a lot of times today that when sales organizations are maybe struggling a little bit, they throw technology at it, right? They think, if I and now I mean I know people are using, like, sometimes in their sales tech stack can be 10, 12 different technologies, and I think that's a trap that people fall into. It's like, we're having a problem with X. I found a technology that solves that problem. When you go, well, no, it doesn't solve that problem, because your problem isn't X. Your problem is actually the process underneath it, or the
That's
philosophy,
important.
or
I agree with you
yeah.
100% because it's I agree with you 100%. And there was something I was gonna tell you, absolute brain cramp. I didn't want to interrupt you, and I lost my train of
No, no,
thought.
you're good.
The whole idea for salespeople is to be in front of their ideal prospects when those prospects are ready to buy, not just when
Yes.
we're ready to sell. And when you talked earlier about the systems, and unfortunately, I see a lot of these folks getting involved in all these different technologies and shiny objects like you're describing earlier. And let's just take CRM, for example. If you don't have a process and I don't have a system where you know step one, step two, step three, where are you, Mr. Sales Rep, in this process? Because it is clearly defined. You end up with overpriced data entry clerks who spend all day typing stuff into a computer, trying to describe what's going on and where it's gone because there's not a
Mhm.
systematic process in place. And they spend their time doing data entry as opposed to being in front of prospects who are qualified and ready to buy.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a key point though about technology. You know, and we're a technology company. But, if I had a dollar for, I remember my journey through corporate America. There was always every company had a communications problem. Eventually, at some stage, there'd be an executive meeting, and the CEO or somebody would go, "We have a communications problem in this company." And what would be the first thing they do is, let's find a solution. Let's find a communication solution. So they go off and they'd say, the poor IT guy, go off and find some technology that can help us with communications. And so you would get the technology or whatever the solution was, and then you would just get a more efficient way of communicating badly,
Well,
because the
the problem
underlying
is
issue had never been addressed.
the problem is IT guys don't know, and I'm just not a shot at IT guys. It's not
Yeah,
what they
no, no.
do. They don't know, like, or even understand sales most of the cases. And to ask someone who doesn't understand, like, or know sales or marketing to design processes that
Yeah,
salespeople are supposed to follow
yeah, no, no.
doesn't make sense.
No, it doesn't make sense. So I think that's the other key thing is to not fall for shiny new toys, but be very circumspect. Like technology, you need technology to enable sales. You need a CRM system to really turbocharge your revenue, but you need to choose the right system. And then what other systems you choose to complement that, you also need to do it in a very, I just think, in a very well thought out and managed process, not just throw things. And I see that's now is a lot of sales tech stacks in companies. They're like Frankenstein's monsters. They're just throwing, and the rep is like bouncing from a CRM over to like Gong or something, and then they're coming back, and then they're going out to Slack, or they're just jumping from technology to technology. And as we know, that's not efficient to begin with, but it's distracting too. And then you have to ask, like, what problem are you trying to solve here? Because it seems like you're trying to solve five problems at one time rather than focusing on one at a time. So I just be very careful and circumspect as you put together your technology stack for sales. But on top of that, now we have this new issue, Mason. If you remember, which you do, because I know you and I are similar vintages. You remember when smartphones?
Vintage is a good word. It sounds
It
way better.
is. It does. It does. Yes. But you remember when smartphones first came out, right? I mean, these weren't buying smartphones for their employees and whatever. The employees were bringing their smartphones into work and starting using them as business tools. And you had that whole bring your own device and that whole, and it was all like, how do we look after security and all this kind of stuff. But it was all reactive because people were already using it. We have the same thing with AI today. Is people are just adopting AI tools, like individual salespeople are adopting tools, and then so within organizations now, you can have people using all these different tools, none of them sanctioned by the company. And they're even going like, it says people, well, if this is going to give me an edge, it's only like $10 a month. I'll pay for that. I don't care. So now you're just expanding this whole, you have
Sure.
got your tech stack, which is a Frankenstein's monster already. And now people are even using other stuff outside it. And there's no strategy or process or rhyme or reason behind it.
So I know that some leaders, this is a touchy subject because some leaders fear structure will stifle creativity. So, how do you balance process consistency with giving salespeople some freedom to adapt in real conversations?
Well, I think that's the whole point is at the end of the day is you want to take away as much of the rote routine and repetitive work that salespeople do. You don't want them to be data entry people. You want the system to do as much as possible to free them up from this and that. And if that is done well, and if they do proper prep work and they look after the system, that should free them up actually to have more time for the creative. Because right now, you're saying, I mean, it's like, and I always love when people say that, it's going to stifle their creativity, right? So you take, okay, Picasso, right? Very, creative. We still had to get his paint. The paints came from somewhere, right? The paper, the parchment came from somewhere. They all came through process. At the end of the day, he was able to gather the materials, the paintbrush, whatever, all the materials that he needed, and then apply his creativity started is when he put that paint on the canvas, right? It didn't start with building the paintbrush. And that's what I'm saying is like you want to set it up so that the salesperson has everything they need and the space to be creative. And the only way you're going to do that is if you have a consistent process, if they're well informed, if you have everything laid out for them, so now they can say, okay, I can engage with this prospect in a much more intelligent and informed manner because I have all of these inputs here and they're all properly laid out and I understand them.
So I'm really reflecting on another conversation I had with Alan Minster, my co-author of Sales Utopia back in the day. And he used to say that in his opinion, most people didn't understand the difference between sales and marketing. He
Hmm.
said, marketing is like planting a crop in the springtime. You kill the bugs, you water the soil, you fertilize it, you give it time to grow. Sales is the harvest. He said, but too often salespeople try to harvest when no crop's been planted, or worse, they don't bother to follow up and someone else comes along and reaps the rewards for their effort. From your perspective, what's the biggest hidden cost of sales and marketing operating in silos? Because a lot of them do.
No, a lot of them do. And I don't even think it's a hidden cost. I think it's an obvious cost because I mean you're definitely not going to maximize your revenues on that. And this is a common problem. And I'll tell you a story, Mason. One time when I was running Huthwaite, which was sales consultancy based on spin selling, the Neil Rackham book based on his empirical research, and he was no longer associated with the company, but we had a large customer, very very large customer, multinational global brand, so I won't name who they were. And they were having problems between sales and marketing, or the CEO was sort of saying like, they're both blaming each other and things are stagnant. So I called up Neil and I said, why don't you come with me and we'll go and do a session. So we met. So there was a CEO and one side of the table, then there was the marketing execs, the other side there was the sales execs. And to be honest, it was money for old rope, as they would say at the end of the day, because it only took a couple of moments to provoke a just an argument between the both sides where they're just hurling, well, not abuse, but they're hurling accusations back and forth across the table. Yeah, the leads you send us over are terrible. They don't work. Yeah, you guys couldn't close a lead if if we, whatever, come up in front of you and smacked you, that kind of
Predictable.
thing.
Very
Yeah, yeah,
predictable.
so very predictable, right? And so after about an hour, the CEO said, "Here's the problem," and he was saying, "Well, what's the solution?" And I said, "Well, the solution is very simple. The solution is neither group understands, like you just said, understands the other person's role." And they're never going to understand that role because they're so separated and demarked. Like it's like marketing goes up to here and then that's the wall, then they throw the lead over the wall, then it becomes sales take it and they move on with it, and that's it. There's that big wall in the middle, and on one side of the wall their marketing is graffitiing sales suck, and on the other side of the wall sales is graffitiing marketing sucks, right? But that was the point. And they were saying, well, what's the solution? And we're saying, well, the solution is very simple. The solution is you have to have sales and marketing integrate or collaborate more with each other so they understand. I said, like, you're often do you have your big sales meetings? You said to this head of sales, like, we have the big monthly meeting where all the regional leaders are on and all of that. And I said, fine, marketing execs need to be on that call. Well, what to do? What? I said, to do nothing, to listen. And he was like, and I said, well, if when the marketing guys are on and they can listen, they can understand what the struggles your salespeople are having, what's needed, what's from marketing is working. Maybe it's not being used correctly. Maybe, there's a lot of unknowns there, but we're only going to know about it by listening and by understanding. And then vice versa. I said, when you have your big marketing calls, like, have some of the sales leadership on there to give you feedback to the team on the materials you're producing, maybe some of the training, things that they're seeing, how customers are. Here's a big one. How customers are actually using your products, right? Because marketing tend to be very, connected with product or services, right? So they understand what's created. They don't understand how it's leveraged later on. As we know, customers tend to use your product or service in ways that you couldn't imagine.
Right.
And so that's the other thing, is then you need that loop. So for me, it's very simple, and it worked here and it works everywhere. When you just start to force, and it has to start with the leadership of both groups to actively engage and be part of, whether it's regular meetings or whatever, but feedback loops where now you're actually collaborating. Now you're understanding more about, oh, I didn't realize marketing was that difficult. And then marketing's like, I didn't realize sales was that difficult as well. And so you get that empathy and understanding, and now you have a proper like flow of communication and collaboration. And to be honest, here's my biggest thing is, like, it's 2025 and we're still talking about sales and marketing, collaboration or sales and marketing alignment. I mean, it's like we talk about it every year, and it's so obvious, and it's got so much upside and no downside, and yet so many people just won't do it. I mean, I'll be honest, like, I'm blown away. I don't understand why most companies don't just say we're going to do this and go for it.
So, what's one exercise or framework that leaders can use to align everyone around the same customer story?
That's a good question. I think one of the best frameworks, actually. I mean, I think if we're just talking about sales and marketing alignment right now, I think the sales leadership, or maybe pick a top salesperson and go through an end to end a sales process that ended up, in a good result and what's happened. But really, just walk marketing through the whole process, and then why the deal was won, what's happening with the customer, what's their feedback, and all of that. That's a very, very simple way of starting to educate, and then to have marketing ask the salespeople to help. Okay, we want to continue to refine and define our ideal customer profile, based on the story you just told us and the others, like, which of the characteristics are very typical here, which are the ones you said, yeah, this looks like my ideal customer. So it's those kind of simple sharing exercises and simple collaboration exercises that are non-threatening, that can really kickstart things.
So, I say this in almost every podcast, but one of my favorite, I love Tony Robbins. I think his stuff is great, is amazing. And I was listening to some of his seminars, and someone asked him, if he said, the question was, if there was only one piece of advice that you could give to somebody, what would it be? And I'm sitting there thinking, this guy has so much amazing knowledge and experience and wisdom that can help so many people in so many ways. What does he value as the most important piece of advice that he could give to somebody? I was like fascinated. I was stopped in my tracks. Oddly enough, the answer to that question was raise your standards.
Mm.
But my question to you, other than raise your standards, is
I'm trying. I'm trying, Mason. I'm trying.
based on your knowledge and experience, if you could only give one piece of advice to CEOs or business owners regarding the sales and marketing, what would it be and why?
Regarding sales and marketing, I'd say my one piece of advice would be to stop treating them as two separate departments and start looking at them as part of an overall customer journey, and how you can and how everybody in the company can come together to ensure that your buyer's experience is the best it could possibly be. And that's what I would say. Stop looking at them as departments. Start looking at same. It's not sales and marketing, customer service, whatever, implementation. Start looking at them as critical components in a buyer journey, from the first time they come in contact with your brand to when they go through the buying process to when they become a customer and afterward, and look at it as a continuum, and then say, how do we maximize this? Because the thing is, we're humans, and we've become worse since we've started to apply all sorts of, like, our consumer buying expectations to B2B buying. But We're unfortunately we're hardwired in such a way is, and I always use this in example is like if you take a flight, right? Say you take an international flight, you get to the airport fine, traffic was okay, you get your car parked great, you get your bags checked in, you're on the plane takes off on time, flight is fine, you arrive in the country. So far you've had a pretty good experience, right? Now you get to the other end, your bags are delayed coming off and they don't make any announcement and you're all standing around staring at each other. Mm, and eventually you get your bags and you go. If somebody had called you when you stepped off the plane and said, "How was your trip?" You would say, "Fantastic, everything's great, just going to get my bags now." Now call you post, and maybe it was only 15 minutes you're waiting for your bags, but there was no announcements or nothing. Now it's, "Oh, terrible. Yeah, no, they didn't. Our bags they didn't come off on time. Nobody told us about it," and that's the reality of human beings. So, if your process from end to end, if that is not the smoothest, the most integrated, and you're having the same experience, hopefully a good one, the same good experience at every point in it, then you win. If you have different experiences at different points, then you lose. Like if I'm so the marketing is great, I love this stuff, and then I go into the sales process, and you're wonderful in sales, but then implementation comes, you kick me over now I can't get you on the phone because I signed the deal and now you're not interested in talking to me. You've dumped me off to implementation are overworked, so they're cranky or whatever happened. But that would be my single piece of advice to CEOs is look at your customers in the totality of their journey, and then go to the everybody in your organization and say, our goal is a frictionless and the most positive experience from the moment they interact with our brand to the moment they become an advocate.
That's a great piece of wisdom. Thank you for sharing that. So, if people want to learn more about you, your company, the work you do, your books, what are the best ways for them to connect with you?
Yeah, I mean, LinkedIn, John Golden, I'm pretty easy to find. Also, pipelinersales.com if you want to learn more about Pipeliner CRM behind me there. And also, Sales Pop Podcast. You can find me on YouTube and all good podcast platforms.
Thank you so much for being on. I learned a lot, and I hope everyone watching and listening did too. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks, Mason.